Welcome, everyone. We are truly proud to premiere the Inkwell Awards 9th live awards ceremony at our home here in Oaks, new home here, in Oaks, Pennsylvania, at the Great Philadelphia Comic-Con. Thank you profusely for joining us here in support of our new host show. For those unfamiliar with our organization, it's an official 501c3 nonprofit advocacy group with almost 100% of funds raised going towards our programs and operations. Neither I nor whose phone was this again? Neither I nor anyone in our committee has ever received a salary or monetary compensation, just to put that out there. Our unique mission, the only one like it in the multiverse, as I said earlier, is to promote the misunderstood art form of comic book inking and educate the public and show appreciation for the best ink artists by recognizing them here. Since we're new at this venue, and many of you only recently heard of us, I'm going to forego my usual comedy killing routine and briefly bring up to speed, which I have been doing, but I'll read through this fast just in case I miss something or there are late visitors. Ink artists, aka inkers, were a role created in the comic medium, similar to inking animation cells, and were originally used at the dawn of the sequential medium as a means of speeding production. The pencil art needed to be redrawn in black ink for printing, and publishers would use a separate artist as part of an assembly line. So while one person penciled a page, another could ink the previous one, or to turn out the book faster. It didn't take long for some artists to become better at one or the other process, and those inkers that were good did much more than just trace. They became finishers and embellishers, able to turn the barest of sketches into completed ink drawings. They added depth, form, mood, lighting, and enhanced readability to the pencil pages, turning them into true storytelling art rather than just being printable pieces. Credits for inkers didn't show up at Marvel and DC until about the 1960s, much later for smaller publishers, and never for some. But when they were credited, since the layperson didn't have a reference point as I got into earlier, there's always been some ambiguity from fans and pros alike. Over the decades, ink artists have been tasked with bringing out the best of their pencil partners, with both artists contributing in their own right to the excellence of the line art in comics as the paper and the printing improved over the decades. So did the ink work, which could be printed with much more line diversity and clarity. Inking became an art form, bringing more quality control in rendering and enhancing the storytelling. These artists were becoming more recognized. That is until about 20 years ago. That is when someone figured out that Photoshop could theoretically replace inking by simply cleaning up more meticulous pencil drawings and darkening the graphic lines in levels to print them successfully. The process was sometimes mistakenly called digital inking, but that was a misnomer, an insult to actual ink artists. The true digital inking involves the same inking skills, just using pressure-sensitive pen and tablet tools instead of a brush or pen with actual ink. By also using computers to render a painted look to the color rather than the old-school flat colors, the inker could be eliminated, they realized. This would supposedly save the publisher money, though not necessarily time, since the penciler and the colorist often had to do more. But this altered process didn't often work as hoped because the art often would look dark and muddy and unclear in print. Traditional inking had contributed so much to the quality of the work over the years that many started noticing the difference and found the images disappointing. Around the same time that some publishers tried phasing out inkers, others marketing departments decided that ink artists were not a sales draw and subsequently changed the established industry traditions in regard to credits. Going off on here, just to elaborate, I think of guys like Terry Austin, who used to be on your X-Men Death of Phoenix trade paperback with his partners Chris Claremont and John Byrne. Imagine how he felt after years of being on that cover to suddenly have it pulled as he got his comps, if he got his comps. Same thing with John Beatty, who saved the first Punisher limited series when Stephen Grant and Mike Zeck had a problem with editorial and bailed, and John stayed behind to make the work look in sync with what was there when the fill-in artists came in. So these are the kind of things that occur these days with that kind of work. They removed their names from advanced solicitations and ads, as well as from covers of collected tomes that used to print the names of writer, penciler, and inker for years. In spite of this, artists often kept silent for fear of losing work in a smaller market. Inkers and our organization don't feel that ink artists are more important or special than any other involved craft. In fact, contemporary times color artists have justifiably become more credited and recognized for their increased contribution to the sequential medium. Inkers simply desire the comparable status to what they received for years before. One of the most unforgivable changes came from our industry's prestigious Eisners, our Academy Awards, who decided to do away with the Best Inker category years ago because it was, quote unquote, too confusing. Basically saying that everyone in this room, fan and pro alike, were not savvy enough to figure out what we do, to understand, to learn what the inker does. And they decided to instead change the category into Best Pencil and Inker Team, that would suffice. All it did was frustrate all those artists who now felt snubbed and disrespected. For several years, I've publicly offered the Inkwells expert resources in helping the Eisners with this matter. So far, there's not been any responses. If anyone in this room can help us get the word out, we'd love to proactively discuss it and assist them in reinstating the solo inking category. And we have our own credits council now, which makes us even more able to help with artist identification issues. So for those above-mentioned reasons and others, I formed the Inkwell Awards in 2008. The first 3 years, our voting results appeared only on our website, and then Shelton Drum, promoter of the Heroes Con, took us in so that we could have a live awards ceremony for more exposure and significant presence in our community. After 8 years of travel from my house, the home base in Massachusetts with Haley, to North Carolina and back, your very own Stan Konopka here at this show reached out to me on behalf of promoter Christopher Wirtz to set up a new arrangement, one where their show would seriously sponsor the bulk of our expenses, save us from travel time, 6 hours instead of 16 for a drive. I've never been so comfortable and supported in a relationship with the shows, the promoters. It's all about mutual respect. The show supports our mission, and they certainly love ink artists. A few season highlights I'd like to briefly mention. Our Dave Simons Inkwell Memorial Scholarship Award recipient from the Cooper School is normally announced in these ceremonies, but with the change of schedule, with the change of venues, we will not have that until 2 weeks from now, I think, May 3rd. So I'll be mentioning that in our next ceremony here. We have 2 educational fundraising events. One is the Joe Sinnott Inking Challenge, which was skipped this year, which I can only attribute to the, like I said, the season being 2 months truncated due to the show location schedule. And we have the Sinnott Inking Challenge Spotlight on David Finch, with thanks to our very own Eric Corpy. Where are you? He's watching Walden Wong's booth. So, anyway, he's the one that spoke with David with me. That project is just ending now, and those involved in with it. Oh, I'm sorry, jumped a sentence ahead. Those involve an artist and/or a publisher authorizing us to use pencil art for a splash cover or pinup, an ink artist volunteering to embellish a blue line printed version. These lovely pieces will be available in our eBay auctions in May, but this weekend, you can come by our booth and see them in person, because we find the best way to educate about inking is the before and after. That's why the gifts we've run online have had people contacting me about how they couldn't wrap their head around what we do until they saw the flashing of each version, so they could see how different artists would bring to the table a different look. Sorry, Walden, you won't make the exhibit from what I understand, but we look forward to receiving that. Thank you. Before and after visuals still the best way to comprehend what we do. We also have former challenge events, which resulted in books collecting them at our booth. We had a couple of achievements this season, such as we changed our nomination process, deciding to invite artists to send in submissions of their work, best work in conjunction with our nominators coming up with their own choices. This puts us more in line with other award organizations. It went off well. We figured out a few ways that we can improve, and we'll certainly make it better next time. Second, we added veteran artists Rags Morales and Dan Parsons to our roster of supportive special ambassadors. While Dan is primarily known as an ink artist, we don't usually place inkers in our ambassador lineup. I'm asked this all the time. Why don't you have inkers in your roster? And my answer to them is that we'd be preaching to the choir. I feel that While ink artists would be happy in that role, a better alternative is to have creators from all positions supporting our mission in the community in solidarity. Editors, writers, color artists, pencils, and so on. It brings, I think, a better message. You are probably familiar with some of our names on the ambassador list, which I'll skip because I believe I just read that off. They help bring us exposure and credibility, which leads to more fundraising, right? Easy for me to say, fundraising and mission success. A final quick note to all of our speakers and award recipients. It's a tradition for our spokesmodel and hostess, Ms. Inkwell, to escort you to the podium. So when your name is called or you're a speaker coming up here, please wait for her. This year, our lovely and dedicated spokesmodels, as I briefly mentioned before, include veteran fan favorite Haley Skazagagny and Ms. Kathy Denise Taylor. Other members of our Inkwell committee here include, as I mentioned, Eric, Tom Schlowendorn, mentioned also earlier, 10-year contributor, and Ray Burke, who had to stay home for that medical crisis. And like I mentioned here, he's been with me for 9 years, and he's more crushed than I am. It's been really difficult. Thankfully, we have the show's audiovisual guy, Jeremy. Jeremy, where are you? Back here. Right there. Who graciously rose to the occasion, I mean like in the last 48 hours, running Ray's slideshow, which we just talked about loading, in his place. Thank you. Thank you all. Now let's introduce our guest speaker, which was Scott Hanna, as I mentioned earlier, who, for those latecomers, is unfortunately very much under the weather and was not at the show today, and hopefully will be here the rest of the days. Instead, okay, I can't read Mark's introduction. You gotta understand, he graciously filled in like an hour ago. He agreed to fill in for Scott, and there was no opportunity for me to print up his introductory statement. So, skipping Scott Hanna's paragraph here, you want to read it? We've never had a guy have to introduce himself like this, but oh, thank you. This will make it more comfortable. Mark McKenna, longtime pal of mine, has been inking comics starting his 34th year this year. He started in '85 at Marvel and had almost 600 credits and over 12,000 pages inked to his name. Recipient of the 2012 Inkwell Hall of Fame Award, Mark also created a children's book line, Banana Tale, and a horror miniseries, Combat Jacks, both of which he published under his Banana Tale Books banner. Now I introduce you to the 2012 Joe Sinnott Inkwell Awards Hall of Fame winner, Mark McKenna. Leave the phones here.
Now you know me? Yeah, there you go. I was a lot darker then. So did you. So I got here about 3 o'clock this afternoon. I have to tell you, 2 guys almost jumped me walking in with my stuff to fill in because Scott called in sick. I hadn't even set up yet, so I'm going to wing this. Also, because we're running about 45 minutes late, I'm going to give you guys a break. I'm going to give you a little bit of my background. I graduated the School of Visual Arts back in 1983. I went to School of Visual Arts because Will Eisner was a teacher there back in the early 80s. And when I went and took his class, I realized as wonderful as a talent as he was, he did the Spirit back in the 40s, if you guys didn't know that. Not a great teacher, but it wasn't his fault because he was brought in for his expertise and stuff like that. But I went away from the comic book business. I originally wanted to be a comic book artist when I graduated School of Visual Arts. After a year and a half, I decided to become an animation major. And then everything back then was hand-drawn, so it was about 1,100 drawings for 1 minute of hand-drawn animation. I was losing my shit after about 200 drawings and decided I didn't want to do that. So Marshall Arisman, who was the chairman of the illustration department at School of Visual Arts, took me in his office as a senior and said, "What are you going to do with this degree?" I said, "Listen, I started out because I wanted to be a comic book artist, but I kind of lost my way." And he goes, "Sal Almondola teaches here. he teaches perspective. Now, Sal Amendola was a new talent coordinator at DC Comics back in the 80s, in the early 80s. So what he did was, he goes, I'm going to hook you up with Sal. You're going to go up to DC offices, meet with Sal, and get a vibe for the business. Well, when I went up to DC, I sat next to Clark Kent, this big 7-foot Clark Kent on a sofa. I don't know anybody who had been to DC back in the early 80s. It was pretty cool, you know, and they had a whole metropolis scape in the background behind them and everything. It was just awesome. I went in there. Sal gave me some samples to take home. I went home. I did them in a week. Brought them back. Felt kind of cocky about who I was, and thought I was going to get a job as soon as I went a week later. Sal turns to me and says, "You will do this. You can do this. Just you need more time." And I was a little crushed, but I also, once he told me that you can do this and you can make a living doing this, that was the gold right there. You know, even though it didn't happen to me for right then, I knew it could do it. So what he did do with me, Sal Amendola, was he brought me into classes at DC. Had New Talent Showcase. It was a book they did back in the 80s, and he brought me in on classes with a lot of new up-and-coming guys. And we would go in every other Friday. Now, I lived in Long Island at the time, so I would commute on the Long Island Railroad 60 miles to New York, go to D.C., which at the time was 666 Fifth Avenue. Marvel was about 25, 30 blocks away. So what I would do is I would take my lessons at D.C., and then I would go to Marvel and show my samples and leave my samples at the door. And one day, I get a call from John Romita Sr. on the phone. Now, John Romita, if you don't know, John Romita Sr. was the Spider-Man artist of my childhood, pretty much, you know, in the 60s and the 70s. And he calls me up and asks me if I want to get a job at Marvel Comics in 1984. I says, well, what does it pay? And first of all, I didn't believe it was John Romita. It was my friend Rick busting my chops, you know. It was John Romita calling me up on the phone, you know. So, that got loud. So after I figured out it was John, he offered me $4.50 an hour to come in to commute from Long Island to New York for what we called the Romita's Raiders. We were a production team of guys that were learning hands-on on staff at Marvel Comics. I told him I couldn't afford $4.50 an hour, and I passed on it just because the commute to New York from Long Island would have been my whole paycheck pretty much every week, right? So he said, listen, I'll keep your name on the list, and I'll call you next time an opportunity comes. And God bless. He comes, after two passes, the third time he says, you have to either do this or I have to take your name off this list. I explained to him that, John, I can't afford $4.50 an hour. At the time, it didn't make sense for me to do that. I was working in an art supply store out in Port Jeff, Long Island. I was bringing home $225 a week, and I thought, that was the gold at the point. So I explained it to him, and then John said to me, what if I got you assisting other artists and inkers' work? Could you do it then? I said, yes, I could do it then. What I ended up doing was I ended up moving to Staten Island, New York, taking the Staten Island ferry every day to Lower Manhattan and taking the R train to Marvel Comics. I did it for almost 2 years. I was on staff there. And the trick with that was that Marvel would never hire me to be an inker on a book because they always saw me as a production guy. So what I used to do now, remember I was in the beginning, I started to go to DC and go to Marvel to show them my stuff. Now I was going from Marvel on my lunch breaks to DC and showing them my stuff. And I went to go meet Joe Orlando, who was a very famous artist on the EC stuff back in the 1950s. He was a special projects editor at DC, and I had a meeting with him at lunchtime on, I can't remember the given day. When I went into the offices at DC, he was out late for lunch, and I heard some rustling of some papers. I was basically had the whole empty hallway to myself, and I heard some rustling papers. And I stuck my head in one of the doors, and Karen Berger was there. Karen Berger was a group editor on a lot of the books, the mainstream superhero books at the time. And I left her my samples. I never got to meet Joe Orlando. I left my samples with her. Next day, I get a call from Karen Berger. She says, Mark, we'd like to hire you, give you a contract, a continuity contract, a bonus, medical benefits, and you're going to be inking Dr. Fate. gold. I hit the gold right then, you know. Quit Marvel like the next day, and went under contract for DC for 4 years, from 87 to 91. And ironically, it was when Ralph Macchio, not the Karate Kid, but the editor on Doctor Strange, called me up and said, we're doing Doctor Strange. And at the time, I was doing Doom Patrol. I was thinking Doom Patrol, Grant Morrison's Doom Patrol, which, by the way, if you guys see that stuff on, anybody seen Doom Patrol on the streaming network? I don't get it. But I have to tell you, this is kind of cool. The stunt team just asked me if I would do a T-shirt design for the stunt team. So I said, you got to get Richard Case in here. Richard Case and I worked on Doom Patrol. He did it for a couple of years. I worked with him for 14 issues. So Richard and I did a whole brand new characters on the back of their jacket, the stunt team jacket, which is really cool. So anyhow, go back to that. So I was doing Doom Patrol, and then Ralph says we wanted to get some of that kind of Doom Patrol kind of art background onto Doctor Strange, and they brought me in, and I broke my contract with DC after 4 years, and I was back where I wanted to be to begin with. I was kind of a Marvel zombie back then. So that was 34 years ago this month. Started at Marvel in April of 1985. So 34 years. It's been good to me. Business has changed, as you guys probably know. You know, a lot of guys aren't, you know, Marvel's not paying what they used to pay, and you know, been a different business. So, but my blessing is that I have enough of a following and a name that I'm able to do my own books now. And I do a book called Combat Jacks, which is a sci-fi book that I do. I run 7 different Kickstarters for different individual comics, and then a collection. I do a children's book called Banana Tale. I've run 7 Kickstarters. I've succeeded in all of them so far. So somebody out there is paying attention to what I do still, and I'm really thankful for that. So I just want to say thank you for inviting me. I know it's, I'm going to go back to my table. I feel bad for the guy who's watching my stuff. Thank you for coming, and support the Inkwell Awards.
Do you want your phone? Thank you very much, Mark. Absolutely. Mm-hmm. Oh, absolutely, especially since Gil's stuff tended to be just like layouts even there often, you know, master storyteller, but he usually, anybody who's familiar with the source material, the printed Death of Gwen Stacy, Death of Green Goblin especially, that's considering it's such a high profile storyline, that definitely exemplifies the kind of partnership, this, as my buddy Sal would say, the synergy that really paid off. I mean, I think those are, that us in the community are really, we hope, we'll never forget that kind of work, the impact it had. Thank you for that, Christopher. Before I pass the mic on to our presenter, we have briefly mentioned a few internal and community awards this season. We award retiring core committee members and any nomination committee member who loyally serves 5 years, what has become known as our special Silver Inkwell. As a side note, our lovely new trophy vendor, Heather Reed at Aces, I don't think she's here, okay, was not able to order the previous Silver Inkwell item from my past vendor with this change of location, and this new one has some prominent cobalt blue on it. But since cobalt blue Inkwell doesn't have that same ring to it, we're going to stick to the traditional name, but they are gorgeous. This year we have 4 Silver Inkwell recipients, all nominators, such as review, columnist, writer Jim Johnson, art collector and former director of the Phoenix Comic-Con, Edward Harris, art collector and Inkwell contributor Damon Owens, and lastly, the former president of Action Lab Entertainment, Sean Pryor. None of them could make it, so I will be happy to ship them their awards. Last year, I created the Above and Beyond Award for Inkwell members who go beyond the call of duty for the position they serve. This includes the nomination committees who serve 10 years, but it also includes certain individuals or entities in the comic book community recognized for their excellence in promoting the art form and or the artists of inking, and we always welcome being informed of people they know that are doing such. One of last year's award recipients was our very own Haley. After having a dozen spokesmodels, as I said earlier, who only survived 1 to 2 public appearances from 2010, 2014, Haley has served 4. First, I know you're going to think it's more than that. You know, the reward I gave her, it says 4, it should have been 3 last June. We'll talk later. First serving as a cosplay volunteer, and since 2015 as our senior spokesmodel for 25 events, 21 consecutively. And the only reason she missed 2, there was a family emergency. Illness does not keep her away. This year, she presents this year's 2 Above and Beyond Award recipients. Haley?
Hello.
Oh, we're beyond that.
Of course.
Okay, here you go. Just
Oh,
put some
righty.
green, and I'll be back.
Okay, cool beans. Hi, everybody. So, oh yeah, duh. I want you guys to be able to hear me. Huh. The first 2019 Above and Beyond Award goes to Michael Hopskin, a writer of Marvel Universe handbooks who has served with excellence as a nomination committee member for 10 years. The second is awarded to Shelton Drum, founder and promoter of HeroesCon, for making his convention our first host show for 8 years. If not for his support, the nonprofit may not have accomplished everything it has. Going into our second decade, both award recipients were contacted and the trophies will be shipped to them. Thank you.
I must also apologize. I realized a little while ago that the multimedia presentation we're waiting for hasn't been actually advancing. Yeah, but I don't blame these gentlemen because they didn't know the cues that Ray had, and it is what it is. Yeah, because before we get our presenting of the main categories, we're going to need that. Does that take long, or? It needs to go to basically where he begins, where okay, excellent. This is the most important part, sure, but yeah, that would have made it a little more interesting. But living and learning, we'll be on top of this hopefully next year. Thanks, Haley. We have a quick round of applause for our winning supporters. Now for our main presenter of the awards categories and results. From what I understand, regulars of this show will need no introduction. But for the rest of us, here goes. Hailing from Mississauga, Ontario, producer and host of An Elegant Weapon podcast, and publicist at SourcePoint Press, and the panel coordinator and host of this very own Great Philadelphia Comic-Con, J.M. Clark.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. Hello, everyone. How are you today? Woo! Firstly, I want to thank Bob. It took a bit to get here. He had quite an adventure. There were some alien battles, some monster attacks, some apocalyptic type events that just seemed to keep occurring. But Bob fought through, and here he is. And we are incredibly, incredibly proud here at the Great Philadelphia Comic-Con to welcome the Inkwell Awards. Absolutely. I'll greet you all with the McKenna Point, and we can get on with the show. I thought I was going to have to vamp a bit about this. Hey, there I am. Good stuff. That's C2E2, which I was just at a couple weeks ago, if you ever check out that. Fantastic show. I thought we were going to have to advance this a bit, but again, Jeremy has caught things up and been paying attention. We're a bit of a fly by the seat of our pants show around here, but that's how we like it, because it keeps things exciting and vital, right? So, what I am going to do is give you the first 5 categories and nominees for the 2019 Inkwell Awards ballot. All are for the 2018 cover-dated American Interior Comic Book Material. And winners Did any make it at all? We have a few? Yes. All right, excellent. Good. Yes, and winners, please remember, wait for Miss Inkwell to assist you and watch your step. The first category is Favorite Inker. Awarded for favorite ink artist over the pencil work for another artist. To save time, I won't read all their impressive credits, but they will be listed on the slides as well as at our wondrous website, inkwellawards.com. And the nominees, to whom I do apologize if I happen to do any name butchering today. I'm sorry about that. My Canadian accent might make things sound a little muddy as well. But I do apologize. So, the nominees for favorite inker are Jay Lyston, Mark Morales, Joe Prado, Trevor Scott, Dexter Vines, and Walden Wong. Let's have a little hand for the nominees. And the winner with 48% of the votes is Walden Wong. Walden Wong is a 5-time Inkwell Award winner. This is Walden's first win for favorite inker. Pulling double duties. See, we're all filling in, helping each other out, right?
Thank you.
Thank you. Congratulations, sir.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for this. So this is weird, right? Holding onto this. But I run a YouTube channel which supports, well, not support, but I promote inking. So hopefully some of you will check that out. And I want to congratulate all the other nominees that was in the same category, because some of those nominees were people that I grew up looking at. Well, not them, but the work. So I admire their work, and then some of them were legends. Some of them were inking before I was even working in comics. So congratulations to them. And thank you to everyone who's voted. Without your support, a lot of you guys don't know how much inking means to a lot of inkers. So this is really important to a lot of inkers, and thank you for this. Good. Thank you.
Excellent. Next is a very interesting award. Next is the Most Adaptable Inker Award for exceptional ink style versatility over other pencil artists. It can be tough to do with lots of varied talent out there and styles with the artists, but these nominees are Mark Deering, Jay Lyston, Norm Rapmund, Cam Smith, and again, Walden Wong. With a possible record of 50% of the votes, our winner is, again, Mr. Walden Wong. This is his 5th Most Adaptable Award trophy since 2014.
So, yes, Most Adaptable Inker. I gotten this before, and when I'm doing comics, I pride myself in being adaptable. So a lot of times when I'm getting a project, I ask the editor, who's the penciler? And when I find out who the penciler is, I'll do research on the penciler. And if I get in touch with the penciler, I would ask him, well, how would they like the work to be inked? And try to gear my work towards that direction, just so it's nice. And then that other award that I got, that's the first time I ever gotten that award. So getting 2 is really nice. Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Excellent. The third category is the Props Award. Props. For the ink artist deserving of more attention for their work. Very important award. Starting this season, an artist candidate could not be nominated for both this category and favorite inker. Nominees are Elisabetta D'Amico. Here's that mangling part. Iber Ferreira. Ruiz Jose. Tongue twisting myself now. Daniel Enriquez and Jordi Tarragona. Oh, sorry, one more. LeBeau Underwood. There we are. The winner with 30% of the votes is Elisabetta D'Amico. This is Elisabetta's first Inkwell Award nomination and win. She was not able to travel in from Rome, Italy, but we do have a recorded statement from her. Jeremy.
Hi. I'm very excited. I wanted to be there with you to thank you, but I am at work and I send you our mug from Rome in Italy. I was so excited for this nomination, really. And I was flattered by how many votes I received. Thank you all. And thank you to wonderful staff. So I'm sorry for my bad English and my pronunciation. I was asked to say something, and so here I am. The only thing I can keep saying is thanks. Thanks to my wonderful family for supporting me, allowing me to realize my dreams. I hope you are proud of me as I am proud of you. A special thanks for David Messina and Sara Pichelli, who believed in me and pushing me further and further. I will continue to do my best, I promise. Thanks to my best friend Sgommatine that have supported me in my everyday, tasting victories and giving me a smile in the defeats. I told to all those people who have told me that I would never done what I love in my life, and I love this work. For me is life. It's so beautiful to remind you how much you were wrong, guys. Now I have to come back at work in order to deserve this award more and more, and so thank you for all.
Wonderful. Thank you, Elisabetta. The fourth category is the Spammy Award for favorite small press and mainstream independent ink work over another pencil artist, non-Marvel or DC work. The nominees are Stefano Gaudiano, Andrew Papoy, Brian Albert Thies, LeBeau Underwood, and Ryan Wynn. With 37% of the votes, our winner is Stefano Gaudiano. Absolutely. He had previously taken this category in 2016, but has been a nominee and often the runner-up every year since 2013. Stefano sent us a video acceptance statement as well. Jeremy.
Thank you for this Inkwell Award. I love inking, and I came of age at a time when inking was clearly asserting itself as something more than just a way to help reproduce the artwork. And seeing the effect that inkers like Joe Sinnott could have on Jack Kirby, Frank Giacoia, and Dan Adkins on pretty much anything they did, Tom Palmer, and John Romita on Gil Kane, Terry Austin on John Byrne, I could see how inking was a way to change the mood of the artwork and the tone of the artwork. So I wanted to also thank all of the people who inspired me.
Excellent. Thank you, Stefano. Our fifth category, which always has the most diverse selection of candidates and the closest races, is the All-in-One Award for favorite artist known for inking his or her own pencil work. The nominees are Joelle Jones, Mike Perkins, Andrew Papoy, Liam Sharp, and Lee Weeks. The winner, with 31% of the votes, is Lee Weeks. This is Lee's first Inkwell nomination and win. Lee regrets that he was not able to attend the festivities, but he forwarded us an acceptance statement to read. Now, oh wait. I don't know if I have that here. Is that where we're reading? I don't have his. I'm sure he's very grateful. I'm sure Lee is very, very.
Before leaving yesterday, but yeah.
Let's say that he's incredibly grateful. He's very upset that he couldn't be here, and I'm sure he would love to be.
Oh, this is it.
Oh, this is it?
Yeah.
Here we go. Let's see here. I want to thank the fans and fellow pros for not only your votes, but for the support, inspiration, and those all too infrequent times of in-person fellowship we've shared at conventions over the years. All of it is fuel that keeps the train running. Fuel that has allowed this allegedly grown man to continue doing the thing he loved doing as a 10-year-old. When I would lay on Big Brother Eric's bed, listen to his stereo, Elton or Stevie usually, and draw for hours on end, doing my best imitations of Ditko's Spider-Man, Steranko's Cap, or anything Buscema. Drawing supplies were a luxury growing up, so the pencils, markers, and paper Mom would bring home from the office were treasure. Now the memory is the treasure, leaving me grateful that a passion instilled early and nurtured by many has allowed me to make a living being the 10-year-old, working and playing in the most dynamic field of telling stories with words and pictures. Thanks to my wife for the years of patience, love, and, did I say patience? Thanks to Tom King for writing brilliant material. Nobody does it better. And again, thanks to the Inkwell Awards for this prestigious award. Above all, I thank God for not only making it all possible, but for reawakening the child within. I'll see you in the comics. Very nice. Excellent. And I believe that would be all. So thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Mr. Bob Almond, I'll be back.
You haven't seen the end of him. He'll be back shortly, but for a bit, let me present our last two prestigious Lifetime Achievement Awards. The Joe Sinnott Hall of Fame Award and the Stacy Aragon Special Recognition Award to 4 recipients this year. They are chosen by the internal nomination committee, which consists of our core committee, members, past and present, plus contributors, ambassadors, there it is, the former Hall of Fame recipients. First up is our 4th Stacy Aragon Special Recognition Award, renamed last year after the longtime devoted Inkwell member Stacey Aragon, who passed away after a decade-long illness. This honor is for an inking career in American comic books for outstanding accomplishment, 25 years minimum. This is distinguished by one or more factors related to the artist and his or her career. A limited career output, inking themselves or a few others, but consisting of impressionable, influential work, limited name recognition due to semi or full retirement or having passed away, a possible lack of innovations or awards, but respected by peers for prolificacy with impressive output. Various hurdles limiting popular exposure, such as gender, ethnicity, or other challenges. This designation is for the underdog, the elder, or a gone and/or retired great. Former special recognition recipients have been Bernie Wrightson, Vince Coletta, Violet Barclay, aka Valerie Smith, Al Milgram, and Russ Heath. Nominees this year include a wide array of professionals, both past and present, too many to list with our limited time. Today we have 2 posthumous winners, but they have more than that in common. Both are Atom Age alumni of the legendary EC Comics. First is Jack Davis, one of the most loved and prolific artists in both comics and illustration. Jack was first published in Tip Top Comics 1936 at the tender age of 12. After a stint in the Navy, the University of Georgia's magazine, and inking newspaper strips, Jack eventually joined Bill Gaines' EC Bullpen in 1950 as their fastest artist, penciling and inking every genre, including horror, war, western, science fiction, drama, and of course, humor. He was the cover and lead artist of Al Feldstein's Tales from the Crypt and a founding member of Harvey Kurtzman's usual gang of idiots for Mad, where he created laughs for over 40 years. Over a half century, Jack's intricately inked and controlled color chaos graced the covers of TV Guide and Time magazine. Several iconic trading card sets from Topps and others, and dozens of movie posters and album covers. Jack sadly passed away in 2016 at the ripe age of 91. He was a Stacy Aragon Special Recognition runner-up, in 2015, and a nominee again in 2017. The other recipient is Marie Severin, who's never been nominated for this category, but regrettably left us just last year at 89. Another comedic action master, Marie started in comics in 1949 as a colorist for her brother John at EC. She studied color and its applications, making EC stand out amongst its more garish imitators. Marie's comics artist career began at Marvel when they needed an artist for an Esquire magazine article. Upon seeing her work, Stanley gave her the art chores on Doctor Strange. In addition to a stint as their head colorist, she drew many major characters, including a historic Silver Age run on The Incredible Hulk. She won an Industry Shazam Award and was nominated for 2 others in the humor division for her landmark work in Not Brand Ec and Crazy Magazine. In 1976, she designed and co-created Spider-Woman. She had a 50-plus year comics career and was indicted into the Eisner Hall of Fame and won a Comic-Con International Icon Award. Could we have some applause for our 2 Hall of Famers? Special Recognition Award recipients. Okay, now Jason, you ready for the Hall of Fame Award recipients? Okay. That's why he's a writer.
Thank you.
I just think.
All right, Bob sits down and, oh, I'm sorry. And finally, we present the 2019 Joe Sinnott Hall of Fame Award for an inking career in American comic books of outstanding accomplishment. Lifetime achievement means 25 years minimum, 2 winners chosen annually. This honor is also chosen by the Internal Nomination Committee. The ever-expanding list of our formidable former Hall of Fame recipients can be found at inkwellawards.com. Former Hall of Fame award recipients include Joe Sinnott, Terry Austin, Dick Gordano, Klaus Janson, Al Williamson, Wally Wood, Kevin Nolan, Mark McKenna, Scott Williams, Dick Ayers, Murphy Anderson, Joe Simon, Tom Palmer, Joe Kubert, Steve Ditko, Joseph Rubenstein, Frank Giacoya, Jerry Ordway, Rudy Nebrez, Joe Giella, and Bob McLeod. The nominees for this year's prestigious honor were Neal Adams, Dan Adkins, John Betty, Brett Breeding, Carl Kessel, Bob Layton, Pablo Marcos, Alan Milgrom, Bob Wiacek, and Bernie Wrightson. To present the first of our 2 winners is a longtime artist, writer, and former editor. I'm supposed to be waiting for, is he around? Larry. Where's Larry? Where's Larry? Hey, Larry. Larry Hama. Hama. Sorry. Hama. I'm a Canadian A coming out. Yes. He would be coming up to present Neal, but I don't see him, so I will take. Hey, ladies and gentlemen, Larry Hama. Things were going too smoothly, so we had to interrupt with something.
Isn't it?
Okay.
Thank you for being here. It's all yours.
Neal Adams and inking. What can I say? The most important thing is that, like, when you think about Neal's work, and his inking especially, I mean, that's what gives it the quality that it makes it immediately recognizable as Neal Adams, is his fist. and his technique and what he puts behind it. And the fact that a huge percentage of the lines are driven by conscious thought. When you look at a lot of inking, a good percentage of it is done on overdrive. Guys sit there and, okay, they know what they're delineating, you know, and you know, for a lot of what they're doing, they're just moving their hand. It's practiced and it's skill, but it's on overdrive. And when Neal inks, you get the sense that there's a big percentage of the millimeters of line are actually driven by conscious thought. That's a big difference. You know, and it makes it all very recognizable. When I first started working at Continuity in the early 70s, sometimes there would be 5 of us in the front room penciling storyboards and comps and motion boards as fast as our little fingers could do it. And there would be like me and Ralph Reese and Russ Heath and Carl Potts and whoever else penciling these things as fast as we could, and Neal would finish. And he'd go off to the coffee room and come back with a cup of coffee and a Linzer tart, and we'd be like, you know, furiously trying to catch up, and he'd have already gone through the stack, and he'd say, "You guys are wusses if you can't keep up with an old fart like me." And even then, as fast as it was, and he was inking with Pentel, you know, and the fact that he had 5 different guys with lots of different styles sitting there penciling it, once Neal inked it, it looked like Neal Adams. And there's not a super lot of inkers that you could say that about, that really can overpower everything. And the fact that he was able to convey this and to teach it to everybody that came up through the studio, through a real old-fashioned atelier art studio methodology. You know, he started the Crusty Bunkers, which was pretty important to inking at that time. Crusty Bunkers was put together because lots of times jobs would be so late. And you'd have to get a whole crew together to finish it. And Neal would put together the crew, and he would supervise it, and he would do the heads, and everybody else would do everything else. But he would go over everything and smooth it all out. You know, and once that magic had happened, it all would hold together. And we could ink like an entire Doctor Strange story over the weekend, or do an entire John Buscema Savage Sword of Conan story over the weekend, which is pretty impossible. You know, what he has done for inking on so many different levels is difficult to convey. I know that the only reason that I'm in the comic book business is because Neal had his foot in the door at DC when the attitude in the early 70s was like, well, we got everybody we need. You know, I mean, we got Gil Cade, and we got all these guys that could do, 68 pages a week. What do we need with some, young Turk that can only do like a page a day? And Neal stuck his foot in the door, and he got in guys like Bernie Wrightson, Mike Kaluta, Jeff Jones, that wouldn't have been able to get in the door otherwise. And I got my first job penciling an 8-page horror story at DC because Neal said to the editor, look, if you give this kid an 8-page story to draw, I'll ink it. And that's how I got my foot in the door. And I've seen Neal do that countless times. So it's, his contributions to the entire concept of inking in comics is sort of hard to fathom because a lot of what he did is under the surface, and his influence runs through all of it like that. I don't know what else I can say. But, he's one of the most terrific inkers ever. I was very lucky as a young penciler that the first 4 people that ever inked my stuff were Ralph Reese, Wally Wood, Neal Adams, and Dick Giordano. So it's been downhill ever since. And, that I know for a fact that every penciler I know that's ever been inked by Neal, appreciates it to the core. And if they were smart, they took it home and they studied every inch of it. Because what somebody that knows what they're doing does to your pencils as a penciler, just 1 page of that is like a master's degree, and you can't get that anywhere else. And I owe everything to this guy. What can I say? I love him.
Neal, you can come on up with our Ms. Inkwell escorts. Neal is a first-time nominee for the Sinnott Hall of Fame Award and first-time winner.
Thank you. Put this in my pocket. It's magnetic.
It's
got a magnet.
Yeah.
Okay.
Let the best.
I'm going to put it there.
All right.
Don't drop it. Don't try not to drop it. I could thank you guys, or I could tell you stories. What do you like?
Stories.
No thank. There's no this thank shit. No, stories. Exactly. Okay. 3 stories. Stan Drake, Russ Heath, and Fred Eng. Are there any inkers here? Wannabe inkers? Inkers? Okay. Let me tell you the tool you'll never use. A Gillette 290 pen point. Have you heard of a Gillette 290 pen point? No? Yes? It's like a feather. Exactly. You know who uses it or used it when he was alive? Stan Drake. Oh, yes. Because Stan Drake used it. Because I didn't want anybody to be able to do what I couldn't do. Elmer Wexler never used a 290. Used a brush. Anyway, Stan Drake used a 290. Let me tell you something about pens and brushes. Philosophy. A brush, you can't feel it touch the paper. A pen, you can feel it touch the paper. So a pen is done by touch and eye, and a brush is done by eye, never by touch. Okay, that's the difference between the two. A Gillette 290, you can't tell when it hits the paper. It's made of steel, and it goes like this, boo, like that. As soon as you touch the paper, it goes boo, like that. And it lets the ink down. And if you don't make that line fast enough, it'll turn into a puddle. Stan Drake could take that line and use it for anything. Touch the paper, psh, finish the line. Never made a puddle. Very hard, very hard. Very few people can learn to use their tools that way. Stan Drake did, and I learned it because he did it, and because I hate somebody knowing something I don't know. So I learned it, okay? But there are lessons that are very hard to learn and almost impossible to learn, which is the second subject. Russ Heath, who had a mind like Michael Golden. There's only two people that I know in the world. There's only two people in the world that had minds like this. I'm going to kill you. Two people in the world that had minds like this. Are you finished? Jesus. Two people. Russ Heath and Michael Golden. They could project, and can, and Golden still can, project what's in his mind to the paper and then trace it. If Russ Heath did a drawing, or Michael Golden did a drawing in pencil, and then he inked it, the pencil drawing would disappear under the line that he inked, and you couldn't find it. Russ Heath, when he was 10 years old, could draw a man, a cavalry officer astride a horse, starting at the lower left-hand hoof of the horse, and then working up and finishing the guy and coming back down and finishing the whole thing at 10 years old. At 10 years, whatever he saw in his mind, he could do. Fantastic, but his inking style, made you look at him differently, because if you looked at Golden and you look at Russ Heath, you realize these guys are thinking alike, and Michael Golden learned it from Russ, because Russ is a genius. I don't know what kind of a genius, a crazy genius, but a genius. I have to say crazy genius because he was crazy. He could draw a tiger tank in perspective according to the lens that he had in his mind of how far that tiger tank was from the lens on a double-page spread, which he did in my studio, double-page spread, tiger tank coming at you with every piece of canvas and weaponry on it without reference, because he memorized it. And it would be perfect in perspective. Then he would shadow one side of it with cross-hatching. And the cross-hatching was so perfect that the same measurement was between each line. Michael Golden can do that. I don't know how. I can't. I am an artisan. They are artists. I don't understand. And I would turn to Russ and I would say, Russ, how do you do that? How do you do that cross-hatching? The angle is the same. He could go across 6 inches and the angle would be the same. I put a triangle on it, it would be the same. I said, do you like to do that? And he turned to me, looked at me as if I was crazy, and said, if somebody paid me to cross-hatch a wall, I would do it. Is that crazy? Okay. So there are geniuses in the business. People mysteriously sliding between the cracks that you don't know and you don't understand, but if you study both of these guys, you'll learn some things that fast. Michael Golden looked at Russ Heath's job that he did on Miracle Man and Mr. Miracle, and he absorbed everything that Russ did on that job and applied it immediately to his own work. Just looked at it and applied it, and his work changed overnight. Because he's a genius, but weird, like Russ. And you run into these people. Now I'm going to tell you, third story, that was the second story. First was the 290 pen point. This is the second, now the third. Fred Eng, never heard of him. He's an animation inker. When I was 15, I went to the School of Industrial Arts. It was called, at the time, it was called the School of Art and Design. Now my granddaughter is going there. It's a great school. It's a high school, vocational high school. At night, we were given the opportunity to go to an animation studio and learn how to ink animation cells, old style, on acetate, over pencil drawings on paper. You put the acetate, and then you ink on the animation cells for Bert and Harry Peel, the Peels brothers, for Peel's Beer. Big, thick animation lines. And we were going to be trained, those of us who were lucky to be part of this, we're going to learn to become animation inkers, by Fred Eng, who had an accent. Now I have to tell you and apologize for this accent, because being 15 years old, we were all 15 years old, we made fun of it. And he had a kind of a funny accent. So I apologize, because as an adult, I'm not supposed to do this. But I'm going to do it. I'm going to do the accent, because it's part of the story. So you have to forgive me. He would say, you pick up your boss, and show me how you hold your boss. And we look at each other and we kind of smile. We kind of laugh at him because his accent was, boss? Really? Okay. Pick up a boss. You say, look on your finger. That is a writer's bump. You have a writer's bump on your finger? Do you? Huh? A little bump. Fine. Anybody who inks generally has that. I don't have it. Oh, pardon me. I don't have it. I don't have it. Fred Eng sent, feel my finger. Okay. 15 years old, I'll feel his finger. No writer's bump. Why? Because you Americans are gorillas. Huh? You Americans are gorillas. You hold your pen and your boss like a gorilla. Really? Oh. What do you mean? You hold your pen on the bone of your finger. Right there. How do you hold it? You hold your boss on the pads of 3 fingers. So you can do this while you ink. You can't do this. You can't do this. Right? Can't rotate your hand. Can't rotate your fingers. He could rotate his hand. So therefore, he could take a brush and make a circle. And the hairs of the brush would follow his finger, follow the brush around and make a circle. He could actually take a brush, which I don't have a brush on me, thin brush, and he could make a circle, and a half a circle, which was on the side of Harry Peel's hair. 1, 2, 3 loops in one stroke. Nobody in comics can do that. Nobody. Because we hold our bosses like gorillas. We do. It's true. We hold them against the bones of our fingers. So we have no movement. We don't know how to move our hand. So we looked at Fred Eng, and the dawning of reality came into our heads, and we said, this guy's a genius. This guy knows stuff that we don't know. So we wanted to learn from Fred. And he taught us many things. He taught us, I'll show you what he taught us. Brush, right? Tip of a brush. He said, you put your brush in the ink, You take your brush out of the ink and you wipe your brush on the edge of the ink bottle, and then you wipe the tip and make a tip, and then you ink. Yeah? No? What? He says, why do you put your brush in the ink and then wipe it on the ink bottle and make the ink go back in the bottle? Because we're gorillas? Because you are gorillas. What are we supposed to do? Okay, he says, this is the tip. This is the inkwell. You put your brush in the ink and you wipe the tip and you leave the ink in the brush. Oh. And then you ink. Now you have a full brush of ink. Oh, God. Anyway, everything he taught us was right and everything we did was wrong. And I'll show you what he did beside that. I'm going to exaggerate this a little bit. We worked on acetate, animation acetate. These were Bert and Harry Peel's eyes. Okay, that's the nose. This is the mouth down here. It's Bert and Harry. Bert was fat, Harry was thin. But they both had these eyes. He said, okay, I'm going to tell you the last story, but believe me, there are many more stories, he's going to say. So I'm just going to tell you one. He said, ink the eyes. Okay, we take the brush, we try to hold it right, and we make a circle. Then we fill it in with black, and then we make a circle, and we fill it in with black. He would say, no. Okay, what do? He says, you dip the brush in the inkwell, you wipe the very little tip. You take the brush and you put it there, in the middle, pull it away. And we watched him as the ink flowed down his brush and onto the acetate, and he pulled his brush away, and then the ink spread to the edge of the pencil drawing of that dot, and it stopped. Then he went to the other eye and he did the same thing, and the ink went to the edge of that pencil dot, and it stopped. That's how you make that circle. And I learned to do that because Fred Ang told me, and I knew I was a gorilla. If you learn to hold your brush right, you can do anything. You can make any kind of a stroke. You can make a stroke that's thick and thin. You can make a stroke that's just thin, that's just thick. You can make a stroke that starts thick and goes thin, make a stroke that starts thin and goes thick. I just described 6 strokes. Most inkers in American comic books ink one stroke, thick and thin and thick and thin. There's 5 or 6 different strokes you can use. You need to learn them. Artists need to learn them to be good inkers, to carry on traditions that have been known for thousands of years. The reason Fred Ang knew how to do this is because in the country he came from, he was inking lettering vertically on cloth and on paper since he was 2 years old. We don't have that tradition in America. So we need to find it. We need to reach out. We need to go to other countries, and we need to learn that. That's what I learned from Fred Ang. And maybe that's why I got the award today. I don't know. Thank you. Thank you. It's a pleasure. It's a pleasure.
Ladies and gentlemen, Neal Adams. Right on. All right. What are we going to follow that with? Next, I'd like to introduce Inkwell Awards Special Ambassador J. David Spurlock, who will speak on behalf of our posthumous second Sinnott Hall of Fame Award recipient. David is an award-winning author, historian, educator, creator rights advocate, documentary filmmaker, and associate to star talents Frazetta, Basil Gogas, Neal Adams, Jim Steranko, Joe Kubert, Carmine Infantino, Julius Schwartz, Wallace Wood, and Dan Adkins. David, will you join us? There's the ladies.
Okay. I think we're supposed to have a slideshow. I asked for it to be done as a loop so we could just use it as eye candy while I talked instead of me talking about individual ends. Do you know if it's a loop? Great. Okie dokie. All right. I wrote a very long article, and I decided I'm going to turn it into a book. So keep your eyes peeled for a Dan Adkins book sometime, hopefully in the next year. I'm talking to P. Craig Russell about maybe doing the foreword to that. Anybody here know any hillbillies? Anybody remember the great renaissance of hillbilly TV? Can you name some hillbilly TV shows? That's a good one. I consider the Dukes of Hazzard the end of the great hillbilly. Andy Griffith. I'll put Andy Griffith in there. A good one is The Real McCoys. Also, there were some seasons was known as the McCoys, and some seasons were known as the Real McCoys. Do you know where that was set at? Where did they live? It may have been shot in Sacramento, but they were supposed to be in West Virginia. Okay, anybody here from West Virginia? There's nowhere more hillbilly than West Virginia. I get to say that because I was born in Memphis. That's close enough. Eastern Tennessee is much more hillbilly than Western Tennessee. Memphis is in Western Tennessee. So anyway, I'm here to talk about my friend Dan Adkins. Danny Lee Adkins was a hillbilly, and he was born in West Virginia. And he moved all over the place. He went into the military. He was born in 1937 in West Virginia, moved to Pennsylvania. When he went into the military, he's in Reno, Nevada, Phoenix, Arizona. And then when he got out, he came to New York, lived in Brooklyn. And then after working for Marvel and working for Tower and working for Wally Wood in New York, and his place getting broke into a couple times and him getting mugged a couple times, he moved to Ohio. And then after a while in Ohio, he moved back east to New Jersey, right across the river from Manhattan, where he could commute in. He became an art director at Marvel. He was fun, he was generous, he was a colorful character. Despite his many years in the New York area, never lost his colloquial country accent. Starting with working with Wallace Wood in the mid-60s, who Adkins had grown up admiring, reading EC comics in the 50s. He began work on Thunder Agents in 1965. Adkins' rise led him to collaborate with many premier talents, including John Buscema, Barry Windsor Smith, Jack Kirby, Jim Steranko, Rich Buckler, Don Newton, Steve Ditko, Herb Trimpe, Gene Colan, Paul Gulacy, and Gil Kane. He's a versatile talent. Adkins wrote, one of the few artists to get credit for writing at Marvel. Penciled, most notably on Doctor Strange. Painted. We started our little slideshow with Adkins painting for Science Fiction Digest magazine. and most famously inked in the comic book industry for major publishers including Marvel Comics, Gold Key, Warren Publishing, DC, and Tower Comics from 1965 for over 5 decades until his passing at the age of 76 in 2013. Along with his associates Wallace Wood and Bill Pearson, Dan also pioneered as a fanzine publisher. Adkins served as art director at Marvel, as a consultant to friends Jim Steranko, and mentored a new generation of artists including Val Merrick, Paul Gulacy, and P. Greg Russell. All right. Now I'm going to do a little improvisation. Let's see. Well, if Neal can imitate someone, I'll try to imitate Adkins. I do other imitations. I do Gil Kane. Well, let's see. All I'll do on Adkins, I've never imitated Adkins publicly. I'll just say, "Oh, Dave." I had to work on that. I first met Dan about a quarter of a century ago. He didn't do many conventions, but he happened to do one of the earliest Wizard shows in Philadelphia, right about 25 years ago, and that's where we met. And then after that, I got to know him better. He moved, in his later years, he lived in Reading, PA. One reason he was drawn to Reading was because he was very close friends with Jim Steranko, and Jim lives in Reading. And so I went out to Reading, and Jim and I were going to go to dinner. He says, well, let's swing by and pick up Adkins. And we did. We went out to dinner. And we had a really good time. And at the end of the dinner, Jim reached for the check. And Adkins looked at me like, what the hell's going on? Because Jim never reaches for the check. And then I wrote a book on wood and did a long interview with Adkins. That was great. He had a wonderful memory. He could quote me all the page rates and everything. It was great. And he was very generous. He was into electronics. I remember him gifting me one time a headset. And I tried to be generous back. I would find out that he was buying my books. I'm like, Dan, don't buy my books. I'll send you the books. Oh, no, I want to. Your books are great. I want to support them. I'm like, Dan, I'll send you the books for free. And he kept buying them. One time he gifted me a big folder. Some of his favorite artists were Wally Wood, Al Williamson, John Buscema, and Frank Frazetta. Those 4 guys were really tops with him. And he gifted me a big folder of scrap that he had collected on mostly Williamson and Buscema. At some point, he got a bad reputation for swiping. And he actually learned to swipe from Wood. The difference was that when Wood inked it, like Larry was talking about with Adams, he could take anyone's roughs and in inking it, turn it into Adams. Everyone would just see the Adams. Well, Wood could do the same thing. Unfortunately, Adkins didn't quite, and people reckon also Adkins picked more recent things to swipe from, whereas Wood tended to pull, if he was going to pull a drawing, he'd pull it from a Golden Age piece, or he'd take it from a photo. Adkins was taking more recognizable things like Frazetta or Buscema to swipe from. And that was sad that he got a bad reputation for that. But he really knew the art. His style, as Neal was saying, that there's a traditional inking line for comic books. And it's here in the 21st century, it has changed quite significantly because we have people like Neal Adams and Bill Sienkiewicz and people who have expanded the medium quite considerably. And now we have computers and we can reproduce lines different from what they could reproduce in the 40s, 50s, 60s. But Dan had a very traditional inking line, the thin to thick to thin, fairly similar to Sinnott in that way. I wanted to say, I've actually been campaigning for Adkins to get this award for a few years. When I think of particularly Marvel inkers, today everyone really sees Sinnott as #1, and he deserves that. And I would say Giacoya would come after that. And I feel like Giacoya doesn't really get his due, probably because he died earlier. And I've seen over the years, people who live longer tend to get more credit, and I'm bully for them. But Adkins, I felt, was kind of like the third man in that roster. But actually, someone else should be in there, and I'm going to start my campaigning for him now, is Chick Stone. What Joe Sinnott is now seen as is the ultimate classic Marvel inker. Chick Stone was before Joe Sinnott became the classic Marvel inker. When Wood left Marvel to go over and start Tower, talent followed him. Steve Ditko left Marvel and went over to Tower. Chick Stone left Marvel and went over to Tower. It was, I frequently refer to it as the image of the 60s. And people were coming. Gil Kane came over from DC and other people. But so after this, I'm very happy that Dan is getting this Hall of Fame award. He passed away. And now I'll start campaigning for Chick Stone. So I'm currently managing one of my many hats that I wear. I'm currently managing the Wallace Wood estate. And somehow it came to my attention, I can't remember how, DC basically offered us a deal on, like a really good wholesale deal on some Thunder Agents hardcovers. I'm like, oh great, yeah, I'll invest in some Thunder Agents hardcovers. We could sell them at conventions and raise some money to keep the estate going. And so I called Dan up. Nobody is more important to that work, that body of work, other than Wood. Dan would be the next guy. Ralph, I would say Ralph Reese is probably the next biggest name to come out of. Really, when you look at the comics industry, there's two studios that so many people came through. And it was a Wood studio, and then it kind of shifted. And it's almost like the baton was passed to Neal at a certain point. He's a little younger. And so everyone either came through the Wood studio or they came through the continuity studio, and a couple of people like Larry Hama actually came through both, and Ralph Reese too. But at that point in the mid-60s, Ralph was very young. And Adkins was the first guy that wasn't just really assisting Wood, wasn't just tracing things or looking for reference for him, but he was actually doing some penciling too. And then Wood would ink, kind of like Larry had mentioned with the Krusty Bunkers, how Neal would do whatever he wanted to do, particularly the heads and things like that, some key figures, and Wood would do the same. And then Adkins would ink some, but he would also do penciling in there too. So I wanted to ask Adkins if he would sign a bunch of these hardcover Thunder Agents books I got. And I called him up and we chatted for a while, and he said, yeah. And I said, I'll drive over to Reading and I'll take you out to dinner, and then we'll go hang out at your place, and sign a bunch of books. And he says, yeah, and we set up a date to do it. After a while, a couple weeks down the road or something, after a while I called Steranko. I said, look, I'm going to be in town. I'm going to go see Dan and take him out to dinner. I'll swing by and pick you up. And he says, well, what day do you have in mind? We agreed on a date. So the day before the appointment, so I called Dan to reconfirm, let him know, remind him I'm coming over. It's a great piece here. This is Gil Kane inked by Dan Adkins. Gil Kane's Captain Marvel work, very important work for Gil at Marvel. There's a later piece, that may be it there. There's a later Gil Kane page inked by Adkins in the 80s, I would say that is, where he gets a little bit of a different line. He's doing more of a spontaneous line than that traditional line I was talking about. There's him inking Kirby. He should have inked a lot more Kirby. For some reason, he didn't, but he really should have. And he loved Kirby. He would have loved to ink more Kirby. And the little bit of Kirby he inked was just fabulous, including when Kirby came back to Marvel after he'd been at DC, which was, I'm just going to say it, just a hair past Jack's prime. And key inkers like Sinnott, Romita, and Adkins would take a little more time to make sure that Kirby came out the best. That's Adkins inking Steranko there. back to my story. So I call Atkins to firm up our dinner date and signing date, and there's no answer. I call him a couple times, there's no answer. And so then I call Steranko, I said, look, I can't get a hold of Dan. And he says, well, you know, he keeps crazy hours, he's probably still asleep, but, you know, just come on over, we'll go over there. If I have to beat on his door, you know, we'll wake him up. I said, fine. So I go swing by and pick up Jim first. We go over Atkins' place. Jim goes, beats on the door. Atkins does not come to the door. And finally, Jim says, you know, I don't know where he's at, but let's go on to dinner. So we go to dinner without Dan. And we have dinner, and then afterwards I say, well, I got these books. He's supposed to sign these books for me. I said, you know, could I leave them with you, and the next time you see him, you know, drop them off, and then I'll come back whenever he's finished. Yeah, leave them in the trunk of my car. So I started heading back to Jersey. I'm about halfway back, and the phone rings, and it's Steranko, and he just got a call from Dan's son, and Dan had just passed away. They found him a few days earlier, and that's it. I just had to share that with you. I miss him. I got one or two little last words here to read. Dan's career spanned 5 decades, comic book industry, Quote from Barry Smith. Dan was certainly my favorite inker in my original Conan period. Quote from Gil Kane. The best inkers I ever had were Dan Atkins, Wally Wood, and Kevin Nolan. John Buscema. I'm going to read the full-length version of this one. John Buscema. I rarely praise the inkers because I would have preferred to have inked everything myself. But my brother Sal, Joe Sinnott, Frank Giacoya, John Romita, Tom Palmer, Al Williamson, and Dan Atkins were all top professionals who did great jobs inking me. And Dan in particular was a fun guy to work with. Though Atkins' work helped entertain millions of people and he helped mentor a new generation, his rich legacy has been for too long under-celebrated. It is a very deserving tribute, and with great pleasure that he is honored as he is worthy a member of the Inkwell Hall of Fame. That's it.
That's great. Thank you for all the time and appreciate you being here.
It's going to be very difficult for me to let go of this, but I'm going to see that this gets to Dan's son.
Right on. Thank you, sir. Joe Sinnott, this award's namesake and first winner, made the following statement about this year's inductees. I was thrilled to learn of the two newest members to be inducted into the Inkwell Awards Hall of Fame. Neal Adams has certainly made his mark in the comic industry. When I think of Neal, I am drawn to his work on Batman and Green Arrow. Also running Continuity Associates Studio in New York City that gave many new up-and-coming young artists their start in comics. Neal and I were fortunate enough to work together on 2 Thor series. Then decades later, we were asked to work together once more on a Batman blank cover to support the Inkwell Awards. That was certainly a lot of fun. Dan Atkins has also had a long, distinguished career in comics. Dan was a great penciler in his own right, but primarily as an inker. His work on the Doctor Strange comics is what I remember him best for. Dan, like me, was a very sought-after inker, having inked a number of artists, far too many to count. His ink line sure brought out the best in many pencilers. He is truly missed. It is with great pride and pleasure that we get to welcome these 2 fine artists and inkers into the Inkwell Awards family. Congratulations on your election into the Inkwell Awards Hall of Fame and the newest recipients of the Joe Sinnott Hall of Fame Award, class of 2019. Well done, gentlemen, Jolton Joe Sinnott. And thank you very much. To close us out, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Bob Allman.
Thank you so much, Jason. That was excellent. Can we have another round of applause for all of our winners? Thanks again to all of our guest speakers. There will not be a Q&A. Actually, it's funny because Stal started supporting doing that in the beginning, and I'm glad we did because we didn't. This is probably the fewest amount of recipients that have been able to appear. So I hope you understand and enjoyed that. And thank you so much for your support, and we'll look forward to seeing you again in 2020.